The tsunami hit the city of Palu at dusk yesterday. Hundreds of people had gathered for a festival on the beach when waves up to 6 meters high smashed ashore, sweeping many to their death and destroying everything in their path. 16,700 people are being evacuated to 24 centers in Palu.
Evakuasi masih terus dilakukan.
Evacuation is still in process and identifying the deceased is also still in progress. We estimate the number of accumulated casualties from both the quake and tsunami will increase further in Donggala and Palu. We also received reports that the tsunami waves reached as high as 6 meters and some people saved their lives by climbing 6-meter trees.
This morning, rattled residents could be seen on the streets of the city as aftershocks continue to rock the region. Patients at nearby hospitals have also been moved outside in case of severe aftershocks. And while hospitals battle to cope with the influx of injured people, bodies are being found trapped under the rubble of collapsed buildings. The city's airport was closed after its runway and air traffic control tower were damaged. But officials say they are preparing to reopen it to allow aid to come in. Indonesia's military has already been sending in cargo planes carrying medical teams and relief aid. Indonesia sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire and is regularly hit by earthquakes. In August, a series of major quakes killed over 500 people in the tourist island of Lombok and destroyed dozens of villages along its northern coast.
Panic and confusion as massive waves devastate the Indonesian island Sulawesi, dragging buildings, cars and people in its wake. Hundreds have been killed from 2 massive earthquakes that hit the island on Friday, triggering a tsunami. To discuss this, we are now joined on the line by Dr Chris Hartnady from the Earth Science Consultancy, Umvoto. A very good evening to you, Doctor. We thank you very much for your time. The Indonesian quake and tsunami has killed at least 380 people. It's injured over 500. Why is this part of the world so prone to major earthquakes and tsunamis?
It's prone to major earthquakes and tsunamis because it's on a very fast-moving plate boundary between the Australian plate to the south, moving northwards, and what we call the Sunda plate, which is includes Malaysia, Borneo, and parts of southern China. And then off to the east of that, you have the Philippine Sea plate. So you have a very complex zone with very fast-moving crustal blocks. And the city of Palu is actually in a quite narrow inlet right along a major fault. It's called the Palu Koro Fault. And that is moving at about the same rate as the San Andreas in California. So we're dealing with a hazard that is of the same nature as the hazard to San Francisco or Los Angeles. It's that kind of situation.
You know, in other parts of the world, Doctor, earthquakes do happen, but they're not always associated with tsunamis. What makes South Asia so different?
Well, the South Asia is so different. It's because oceanic crust is being what we call subducted. And so there are thrust faults that are carrying continental crust over the oceanic crust, and there are big topographic differences. So when you have rapid movements on these faults, the sea floor gets a kick, and that gives rise to a displacement of the surface of the sea, which then results in the propagation of tsunami waves away from that area where essentially the whole ocean has been bumped up by the movements. The intriguing thing about the Palu Koro situation is that, like the San Andreas, that is not a thrust fault. The San Andreas is what we call a right lateral strike-slip fault, and the Palu Koro is a left lateral strike-slip fault. And with strike-slip faults, you don't expect vertical displacements of the ocean nearby. So what is suspected in the case of this latest earthquake is that that fault crosses a boundary between effectively continental crust and nearby oceanic crust, and that there was a large submarine landslide effectively on the continental slope to the west of that fault. And it's the landslide that then gave rise to a big displacement of the sea, a very localized displacement. And because Palu is situated on a fairly narrow inlet, the wave then just came into the inlet and became amplified as it traveled towards the city. It's quite interesting to note that there was no tsunami warning issued and no real tsunami waves picked up by tide gauges around the city. So it was very, very localized occurrence.
You know, speaking on that, the Indonesia emergency minister said that some people were actually on the beach when the tsunami warning was sounded, but didn't leave immediately, and they also became victims. You know, let's just have a look at the issue of these emergency warning signs and, you know, the significance of them.
Well, exactly. I was quite surprised to hear that too, because the normal rule, if you're in an area like Indonesia or any very active tectonic area alongside the ocean, the best advice is if you feel a strong earthquake, move immediately to higher ground. Don't wait for any warnings. Don't just get high as soon as you can. And that people were still waiting around after the earthquake, it is really surprising to me.
You know, coming back home, today marks the 49th anniversary of the Toolbox series earthquake, which took place in South Africa. Let's just discuss how damaging that quake was.
Well, it killed about a dozen people, as I recall, and it was very damaging.
Can you turn up the volume in my ear, please? I can't really hear the studio.
There was a slight interruption on the line. So the earthquake killed about a dozen people, and it caused great damage, probably something of the order in 1970 rands, about 25, 30 million rand damage. Many historic buildings, of course, were very badly damaged, some beyond repair. So it's a significant. Next year will be the 50th anniversary of that event, and I think it's important to commemorate that because it does remind everyone that almost any place on the planet is a potentially hazardous zone from earthquakes or other kinds of natural disasters. And so, particularly 49th anniversary is not so important, but next year, the 50th anniversary will be important. It's also important because it's the 210th anniversary of the 1809 Milnerton or Cape Town earthquake, which is much older and also a very significant event in this country's seismic history.
Yeah, you know, South Africa is not really prone to natural disasters. Has South Africa learned any lesson from possibly being better prepared in the future if something like this would have to happen again?
Well, certainly the professional disaster managers are very well prepared, and in fact, many of them, some of the disaster management people from the Western Cape I know actually participate in international earthquake rescue procedures. You know, many of them have been in places like Indonesia or Iran or Turkey after these major disasters, just to get the kind of practice that may be needed back home, but with a very, very low probability here. The chance of another Toolbox series earthquake is actually very low, but we can't predict, and it's best to be always prepared for the worst possible case, I guess.
Definitely. We thank you very much for your time this evening. Very insightful, Dr. Chris Hartnady from the Earth Science Consultancy. Umvoto, just giving us a bit more around the incidents of that Indonesia tsunami as well as the earthquake, and of course that commemoration throwing forward into next year, the 50th of that Toolbox series, which claimed 12 people's lives here in South Africa.